Welcome back to the Prescription of Travel MD podcast. I'm Dr. Courtney Downs. Thanks for joining me today. It's the beginning of June and the kids are out of school. Parts of my home are under construction. The little people have taken over some of my spaces, hence my current recording situation. And everyone is adjusting to life in the summertime. It's a little bit slower, which is much appreciated after finishing the race to the finish line. That's May. If you have school age kids, you already know. Anyway, June is probably one of my favorite times of the year because it signals the slowdown in a way. And June is also Caribbean American Heritage Month, and it got me thinking about one of my favorite regions in the world to slow down, the Caribbean. And honestly, I think part of the reason it holds such a special place in my heart is because Trinidad was the first place that I ever traveled outside of the US. So long before I knew anything about points and miles, long before Prescription or Travel MD, long before I was teaching people how to use credit card points to travel the world, I went to Trinidad Carnival. And like a lot of first travel experiences, I think it changed something for me. The different people and the food. Food is a way to my heart, and they have some of the best food in the world. Different music, the traditions, and realizing at that moment that there was this whole world out there that I hadn't experienced yet. I think there were stories and the culture and the perspectives that I knew very little about, but I wanted to learn more. And looking back, I think that trip sparked something in me. It made me curious about the rest of the world. And honestly, that's still one of the things that I love most about travel and going to a new place today, the curiosity of the unknown. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love relaxing, laying by a beautiful beach, a great resort, a luxury hotel redemption as much as the next girl. But that's definitely a draw for me. But what keeps me coming back to the Caribbean isn't just the beaches, it's the people, it's the culture, it's the food, it's the music, it's finding something distinct that makes one place unique and stand out from the rest. I think it's the feeling of being somewhere that knows exactly who it is. And if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you may know that my husband is actually from Trinidad. So I had the privilege of returning again and again. And it's not just a destination anymore, it's part of my family's story, which is why it feels full circle that in February 2027, I'll be heading back to Trinidad Carnival with the group. So almost 20 years after my first carnival. Wow, I can't believe I just said that out loud. By the time this episode airs, the informational webinar that I'm hosting will have already happened. Trip planning is underway. If Carnival has ever been on your bucket list, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to join me. This trip is shaping up to be something really special. And, as I've been planning this trip, I found myself thinking a lot about what makes the Caribbean so unique. Because again, most people hear Caribbean vacation, they picture a beach chair, an all inclusive resort, maybe a frozen drink with a tiny umbrella in it. And honestly, that's not wrong, right? The Caribbean has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Most places don't compare. So 7 Mile Beach and the Grill blew me away. We got married on the shores of Aruba with the ocean as our backdrop, but that's only part of the story, right? So one of the biggest misconceptions people have is thinking the Caribbean is just, one thing, but Jamaica feels different from Trinidad, and Trinidad feels different from Barbados, and Barbados, was a completely different vibe from Curacao. So every island has its own personality, its culture, traditions, food, the music. There are obviously going to be some similarities, but what makes them different is, what makes it so, like, interesting to be able to travel and try different parts of the Caribbean. I think it's what makes the region fascinating, and you can just keep going back, and you can have a completely different experience every time, and there's always a story. And, as I was preparing for my webinar for Trinidad Carnival, once again, going down the rabbit hole of all things Carnival, it reminded me just how rich in history Carnival is and the Caribbean is. And we think about, the parties and the parade that draws thousands of people there every year, but Carnival really is chock full of history. So the roots of Trinidad Carnival trace back hundreds of years. The French colonists came in, they brought in their pre-Lenten celebrations from the day after Christmas onward to Lent. They would have these festivities that were exclusive, and if you were an enslaved African, obviously you were not included. So what did they do? They created their own traditions, incorporating African music and dance and storytelling and just their own form of cultural expression. And after they were emancipated, those traditions moved into the streets and evolved into what we now know today as Carnival. So yes, there are costumes, yes, there are parties, but there's this incredible history underlying all of this. It's a celebration of freedom and creativity and resilience and culture. And Trinidad Carnival, which is often cited as the mother of all carnivals, is not just an event, it's part of the country's identity. Like, the food alone is worth the trip. So doubles, bacon shark, roti, callaloo. And if you're anything like me, you'll probably spend half the trip planning your next meal. Now, Trinidad isn't the only place where you can experience carnival culture. Jamaica Carnival typically takes place in April. Barbados has crop over that runs, in the summer, usually in late July or early August. You've got St. Lucia Carnival, which is usually held in July. Grenada Spice Mass happens in August. Toronto has a carnival, still commonly called Caravana, that takes place in July, early August. It's one of the largest Caribbean cultural festivals outside of the Caribbean itself. And it's actually pretty common for people to build an entire travel calendar around carnival season. And after experiencing it myself, I completely understand why. Now, because this is me, while I'm researching carnival, I'm also looking at flights and hotels. So let's talk points. One thing that surprises a lot of people is that business class to the Caribbean often doesn't look like business class you see on Instagram. So most flights from the US to the Caribbean are relatively short. They're going to be operated by narrow body aircraft. So even when you're flying business class, you're usually getting like a large recliner seat. You may get like priority boarding and lounge access and like better service, but not necessarily like a lie flat bed. So just keep that in mind. There are some exceptions. Occasionally you'll find a flight like, JetBlue Mint, for instance, and you'll get your lie flat seat, and they'll usually operate planes from hubs like Miami or New York or Charlotte. So still, again, usually a quick short flight, but they're definitely the exception rather than the rule. And honestly, for a 3 or 5 hour flight, I don't necessarily need a lie flat seat. I'd much rather save those points for like an overnight flight to Europe, which is going to, be a 10, 12 hour flight, or Asia, and use my points where they make the biggest difference. So for me, some of the best Caribbean redemptions are actually on the hotel side. I think Hyatt, even though we've been a little sad and upset with Hyatt recently, but they're continuing to expand throughout the region. They've got the new Andaz Turks and Caicos that's opening up, generating a lot of excitement. There's the Kempton, it's an IHG property. So if you have an IHG card or points, or you're looking for a way to use that extra $250 credit on your Chase Sapphire Reserve card, which you can use at IHG properties, and also stacks with that $250 Chase Edit credit that you get if you book a 2-night stay at a Chase Edit property, and you do that through the Chase portal, which gives you extra perks like check-in, early check-in, late checkout, breakfast. That's one to consider. Hyatt Regency Aruba, that remains a longtime favorite for many points travelers. While some of the all-inclusive properties now cost more points than they used to. Looking at you again, Hyatt. There can still be tremendous value, especially if you're traveling during shoulder season or off-peak times. So the key is, again, comparing the cash price, see if the points price makes sense, and then deciding whether the redemption just makes sense for your goals, right? Because ultimately, points, again, they're a tool to help you travel more, to improve your quality of travel. So just keep that in mind. There's the Grand Hyatt Baha Mar in Nassau. You can book that with points. I'll actually be heading there early next year to speak at the Women Professional Wellness Conference in the Bahamas. So I'm excited about that and excited to check it out. Excited to be there and just to spend some time around other women who are intentionally designing their lives, and to get a little bit of R&R myself. I think that's another one of the lessons the Caribbean has taught me over the years, to slow down, because they are not rushing, okay? And as physicians and busy professionals, we're often the ones rushing around trying to get everything done, especially here in the US. I think it's part of the culture. And ironically, while we're rushing, we're waiting. We're waiting for work to settle down. We're waiting for more vacation time. We're waiting for the kids to get older. We're waiting for life to somehow become less busy. So maybe, just maybe, decide to pause and just slow down. Celebrate now and gather with the people you hold near and dear now. Take the trip now. Caribbean's right around the corner. Enjoy the people around you now, not because everything is perfect or the timing is perfect or because you have the time, but because you can make the time, and because life doesn't wait. And, this is my old Tibet trip that started it all, Trinidad. The first stamp on my passport when I had very little money and very little time as a fourth year med student. The first glimpse of a world that was bigger than the one that I knew. The place that sparked a lifelong curiosity about travel, and the first place I traveled with the man that I would marry. Not bad for a first international trip. If you've been thinking about visiting the Caribbean, consider this your sign. Go for the resort and beaches, but just go beyond the resort while you're there. Learn a little bit about the history and try the food and listen to the music. Talk to the people. And if Carnival has ever been on your bucket list, maybe this is the year you stop saying someday, and you're going to decide to join me on the road. Trinidad Carnival, February 2027. Carnival is early next year. Carnival Monday and Tuesday are happening February 8th and 9th. I'll be sharing all the details on my webinar with the replay available if you can't make it live, so make sure you reach out. Space is limited. I know they're going to go fast, but maybe it's your sign to be there, and it's going to be a spectacular time. And if you need help planning your next trip on points, Whether it's to the Caribbean or beyond, I do offer travel strategy services to help you get to your next destination. So be sure to reach out. Let's get you on your way, all right? Thanks for listening. See you next time, guys.